Growing up, I never saw myself running the family landscaping business. But as the only child, my father's hard work and values shaped my path, especially as he made me start from the bottom, filing papers, sweeping floors, and then moving on to labor in the field. He always valued dedication and honesty and made sure I saw every aspect of the business. By the time I finished high school, I was leading work crews, and I began to feel connected to the business my father had built. Years later, after I took over the business, I faced a new era of managing operations in the digital age. I loved the independence, and with my father's lessons guiding me, I felt prepared for the challenges. Despite technology making some tasks easier, unexpected issues still came up. I even dealt with the occasional system crash, but I had backups and contingency plans to keep things running smoothly. Now, a little about me. I'm Donald Summers, though my friends call me Don, and only my mom and wife call me Donnie. I'm 35, tall, and tan from years of outdoor work. I've been married to my wife Brittany for 13 years, and we have 2 kids, Danielle, 9, and Brian, 7. My wife and I live a busy life balancing work and family, and I try to make time for what really matters. But everything changed one day when I was at my office using Google Earth. While waiting for some files to restore, I got the idea to check out my own house, as I'd been thinking about installing a pool for the kids. As I zoomed in, I noticed something that felt out of place, a car I didn't recognize parked in my driveway. It struck me as odd because I know most of Brittany's friends, but this one was unfamiliar. The car was red, and from the look of the surrounding snow, the image must have been taken just a few months back, sometime last winter. Intrigued, I clicked on Google Street View to see if I could get a clearer look. As the image loaded, my heart dropped. There was Brittany, standing in the doorway of our home, kissing and hugging a man I didn't recognize. At first, I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation, but the image was too clear to ignore. I printed a few copies of the photo and stared at the man. Even though I couldn't fully see his face, something about him felt familiar. After some time, it hit me. He looked a lot like Britt's ex from college, Ben Clausen. Realizing this stirred something dark inside me, but I knew I needed the full story before making any moves. I thought about my options, hiring a private investigator, setting up cameras, maybe even confronting her directly. But for now, I chose to gather more information. I searched Ben Clausen's name online and discovered he was a local real estate agent who had recently moved back to town after a brief NFL career ended by injury. He was married, with a kid, and his wife, Angela, worked as an accountant in his office. To confirm whether Ben was involved, I called his office, hoping to catch him off guard. But the receptionist informed me he was out showing a property and wouldn't be back for at least an hour. This lack of solid evidence frustrated me, but I was more sure than ever that something was going on. Grabbing the printed photo, I made a quick decision to visit his office. I was done sitting back, and I needed answers. When I arrived at Clausen Real Estate, Angela was at the front desk. She greeted me warmly but seemed taken aback when I introduced myself and mentioned I had a photo to show her. I handed it to her without a word, watching her face shift from surprise to hurt and then to anger. After examining it, she finally admitted that the man in the photo was her husband, Ben. Her voice shook slightly as she asked when the photo was taken. "Not more than 3 months ago," I replied, explaining how I found it on Google Earth. Angela took a deep breath and seemed to be fighting back tears, but then she straightened up, her face full of determination. "I've let him get away with too much already," she said. She suggested we go to my house to confront them, which confirmed that she suspected something had been going on, too. We left her office together, both silent as we drove to my house. On the way, Angela confessed that Ben had cheated before, years ago when they lived in Colorado. She thought their move back here had given them a fresh start, but now that hope seemed pointless. I told her I had always trusted Brittany and never thought she'd betray me like this. Angela nodded, lost in her own thoughts as we sped down the road. When we finally arrived, a red car, the same one from the Google Earth image, was parked in my driveway. Angela clenched her jaw as she whispered, "That's Ben's car." I parked a little further down the street, and we quietly walked around the back of the house, hoping to catch them off guard. I felt anger boiling up inside me as we reached the door. Angela pulled out her phone to record, and I only wished I'd brought a camera myself. As we opened the back door, muffled voices and laughter drifted from the living room. My heart pounded as I approached, signaling for Angela to stay behind me. But as I rounded the corner, I was stopped cold, not by Ben and Brittany, as I expected, but by a completely different scene. There, in the living room, was Brittany with another woman. Ben was seated nearby, casually recording them with his tablet, and laughing like it was some private joke. Angela stepped into the room and gasped. Her camera was rolling as she realized what she was witnessing. Just then, Brittany noticed us and froze. The room went silent. For a moment, I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. Rage took over, and I charged at Ben, shoving him to the floor. "Shut up! All of you!" I shouted, not caring about the details anymore. All I knew was that everything I thought I had was being ripped apart. Angela tried to pull me back, but I was beyond listening. Brittany stammered out an apology, but I couldn't hear her. Instead, I turned my attention to Ben, seething with anger. He was the one who had started this mess, and I was determined to make sure he knew the damage he had caused. Angela grabbed my arm, reminding me to keep my cool. I took a step back, letting go of Ben, who was still sprawled out on the floor. Brittany, pale and wide-eyed, tried to stammer an explanation, but I cut her off with a cold glare. There was nothing she could say that would make this better. Angela and I walked back to the kitchen, where she called her husband's office, claiming she needed the day off for an emergency. When she was done, she turned to me and said, "We should call your parents. They deserve to know." My parents arrived within minutes, having been in the area already. As soon as my mom stepped in and saw Brittany's guilty face, she immediately understood. She looked from Brittany to me, her expression a mix of hurt and confusion. "What happened, Donnie?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I explained everything to her, leaving nothing out, and offered to show her the video footage. She declined, her face tight with restrained anger. My dad put a hand on my shoulder, nodding silently, offering support without needing to say anything. Soon after, Brittany's parents, George and Virginia, arrived. The moment they walked in, they froze, their eyes moving from Brittany to Ben. "What's going on here?" George demanded. I looked at Brittany, giving her one last chance to explain. She avoided my gaze, hanging her head. So, I took it upon myself to lay out every detail. Her parents listened in stunned silence as I recounted the events, their expressions shifting from shock to disbelief. Virginia eventually spoke, her voice cracking. "There has to be some mistake. Brittany wouldn't. She just wouldn't do this." I took out my phone, ready to show them the video. "I have proof. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't real." A long silence followed as the weight of everything finally settled in. George sighed, asking what I planned to do next. "Divorce," I said firmly. There was no question in my mind. I'd trusted Brittany with everything, and she'd thrown it all away. Angela, who had been silently fuming beside me, added, "Ben and I are done, too. There's no going back after this." Her words seemed to hit Ben hard, and he looked down, ashamed. He didn't even try to defend himself, knowing full well there was nothing he could say. I laid out my conditions. I wanted full custody of Danielle and Brian, with Brittany only getting visitation. Virginia tried to argue, saying kids needed their mother, but I cut her off. After everything Brittany's done, she doesn't get to raise my kids full-time. This isn't negotiable. Brittany finally spoke, desperation in her voice. "Donnie, please don't do this. We can work through this." But I wasn't going to let her sway me. "No, Brittany. You made this decision when you betrayed me." As Brittany broke down in tears, her father turned to me. "Are you really going to take our grandchildren from their mother?" he asked quietly, looking for some sliver of compromise. I met his gaze steadily. "I don't care what you think. The kids stay with me. If anyone tries to challenge that, I'll make sure the entire town knows exactly why we're getting divorced." My ultimatum left no room for argument. Brittany and her parents knew what I was capable of, and they knew I wasn't bluffing. In the end, they relented, agreeing not to fight me for custody. Angela gathered her things, looking at Ben one last time before turning away without a word. My parents, visibly shaken, offered to take the kids for the night so I could collect myself. After a quick hug from Danielle and Brian, I watched them drive off with my parents, feeling a hollow emptiness in my chest. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my darkened house, the reality of my shattered marriage hit me hard. I thought back to when Brittany and I first met, how certain I'd been that she was the one. How quickly that certainty had turned to betrayal. I realized that our love had been one-sided for a long time, she just hadn't been honest about it. The days following the confrontation were a blur of lawyers and court documents. True to their word, Brittany's parents didn't contest the custody arrangement, but they remained icy toward me. I didn't care. My focus was on my kids. When the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sadness. Everything Brittany and I had built together was over. The family we'd created was fractured, and while I tried to stay strong for Danielle and Brian, there were nights when I felt the weight of it all. I'd done everything right, yet here I was, a single father, picking up the pieces of a life I hadn't asked for. The divorce was finalized, but the emotional aftermath lingered. I threw myself into my work and focused on being there for Danielle and Brian. Despite everything, they still loved their mother, and I wanted to keep our family life as stable as possible for their sake. Over time, things settled into a routine. Brittany remarried within a year to a diner owner in town. My kids seemed content with the new arrangement, though I could tell Brian still held on to the hope that one day we'd all be together again. Danielle was older and more realistic, but she still asked questions about what happened. I was honest, explaining as best I could without dragging Brittany's name through the mud. I wanted them to see me as the father who would protect them no matter what. As the years passed, I occasionally dated, though I was cautious, hesitant to let anyone too close. I met someone named Mandy, a local trainer, but while we had a good time, it was never serious. Mandy once asked me if I thought I'd ever marry again. Honestly, I'm not sure, I told her. After everything with Brittany, I'd learned that trust wasn't something I could give so freely anymore. A few years later, I found myself unexpectedly drawn to another single parent, Dawn, who taught at Danielle's school. She was genuine, down-to-earth, and someone I could truly talk to. We went out a few times, and I could tell she was just as cautious as I was. Our bond grew slowly, naturally, and I began to feel something I hadn't in a long time, a real sense of hope. When I proposed to her on my 40th birthday, surrounded by close family and friends, I thought I had finally found my second chance. But to my shock, Dawn hesitated. She looked away, murmured something about not being ready, and then left. The pain of that night stayed with me, though I tried not to let it define me. I learned to accept that some things just aren't meant to be. Looking back, my life didn't turn out the way I had once imagined. I never remarried, though I found comfort in my family and my work. As Danielle and Brian grew up, I poured my love and energy into supporting them. Danielle eventually went into nursing, while Brian expressed interest in the landscaping business. Watching them pursue their own paths brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. In the end, I built a life that, while different from what I'd planned, was still fulfilling. I had friends, a thriving business, and a future that felt stable, if not entirely the happy ending I'd dreamed of. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes life doesn't go the way you expect, but you can still find happiness where you least expect it. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to my channel for more content.